And welcome to the special audience edition of Hannity. And tonight, for the entire hour, I'll be joined by somebody who had the internet buzzing following his remarks at last week's National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. Dr. Benjamin Carson is one of the most accomplished physicians in the entire world. But despite his many accolades, which include being awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2008, he was an unknown quantity to many Americans. That is, until he stepped up to the podium last Thursday morning, and with the President of the United States sitting just steps away, Dr. Carson eloquently and politely described his vision for saving America. Among the topics that he covered, the perils of political correctness, education, the healthcare system, and much more. Let's take a look at a quick preview.
One last thing about political correctness, which I think is a horrible thing, by the way. I'm very, very compassionate, and I'm not ever out to offend anyone. But PC is dangerous. Because you see, this country, one of the founding principles was freedom of thought and freedom of expression. And it muffles people. It puts a muzzle on them. Why is it so important that we educate our people? Because we don't want to go down the same pathway as many other pinnacle nations who have preceded us. I think particularly about ancient Rome. Very powerful. Nobody could even challenge them militarily. But what happened to them? They destroyed themselves from within. Moral decay, fiscal irresponsibility, they destroyed themselves. And if you don't think that can happen to America, you get out your books and you start reading.
Now, we're going to have much more of the doctor's speech as we continue tonight, but not surprisingly, whenever somebody has the courage to speak truth to power, particularly when it involves the president, well, he or she quickly becomes a bit of a political lightning rod. Now, that familiar phenomenon happened in the aftermath of Dr. Carson's comments, with some pundits describing his actions as, quote, disrespectful. Now, tonight he will have the opportunity to respond to those critics. We'll also hear from the doctor on how we can turn around the economy, restore credibility to our healthcare system. Also, Frank Luntz tonight will stop by with a focus group of voters who actually dialed Dr. Carson's speech. Now, do they think he may have a shot sometime in the future at the White House? Well, that surprising answer lies ahead. But before we get into all of that, it's time to meet the man himself. We welcome author of America the Beautiful and the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Benjamin Carson. It's an honor to have you. Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Doctor, you've gone viral. Maybe not something you predicted in your life?
Yeah, usually in medicine when we think of viruses, it's not a good thing. But this one, this one turned out to be very good because I've been just overwhelmed by the responses. So many people are just overjoyed to hear some common sense. And I don't think that I've put forth anything that's that intellectually challenging. It's just that it's so much better than most of what we're hearing from Washington that it seems like, you know, a great revelation. And, you know, the important thing, I think, is to begin the dialogue. You know, some people say, you know, you can't say something like that in front of the president. Well, when did this become a monarchy? You know, we are the people. The president works for us. And, you know, we need to remember that, you know. This is a country that is for, of, and by the people, not for, of, and by the government. And that is the big battle that we are in right now. And we need to make a decision with our eyes open. Which country do we want to be?
It's interesting because you made the comparison of ancient Rome, and you said this could happen to America. Is that something you fear?
I definitely fear it because we're in very much the same position that they were in. So powerful, pinnacle nation in the world, no competition, going to be there forever, so they thought. And then all the military expansionism started. And capturing this group and this group, of course, that requires a lot of resources when you capture people to keep them under control. And they quickly began to run out of money. And then they're looking for any kind of scheme to get money from the people. And the rich people, they have a lot of money, so let's come up with some schemes to get their money. And of course, that erodes another aspect of confidence and creativity within your society. And they just continued right down the path of destruction.
And that could happen here.
It's in the process of happening. The real question is, are we smart enough to stop it? Can we actually learn from those who've gone before us or must we inexorably go down the same path as all those people who've preceded us and done the same thing?
Let's hope not. You actually used the phrase on my buddy Neil Cavuto's show. You said somebody's got to stand up to these bullies. Define the bullies that you were talking about.
Well, the bullies I'm talking about are the PC police. And, you know, they come in many shapes and forms. Certainly a lot of them in your business.
I'm very well aware of them, yes.
The media who try to define what you're supposed to think. And unfortunately, I think it's the very thing that our founders were talking about when they said it's so important, and our system of government is based upon a well-informed populace, because if they're not well-informed, they are very easy to manipulate. And all you have to do is look at some of those Jay Leno segments where they go up man on the street.
Jaywalking.
Yeah.
My favorite segment. By your background, this is amazing to me, your background. Mm. Your mom was married at 13, yeah. One of 24 children?
Yes.
And you were not a very good, you were a troublemaker.
I was perhaps the worst student you've ever seen. Mm. You know, I thought I was stupid. All my classmates thought I was stupid, so there was general agreement.
But that was in 5th grade.
That was in 5th grade. Yeah. And, you know, fortunately for me, my mother believed in me when no one else did. And she just said, Benjamin, you're much too smart to be bringing home grades like this. I brought them home anyway, but she was always saying that. And you know, one day she just came home after being at work and being inspired by looking at all the books that her employers were reading. And she said, you guys are going to read books and you're going to stop watching so much television. And she made a prediction which is really quite uncanny. She said, if you start reading books, one day people will be looking at you on television. Hi, everybody.
Very well said. But it was even deeper than that. She had a 3rd grade education herself. Yes. And you made a comment in that speech that she would look over your reports. You had to write a book report.
Right. She said we had to read 2 books apiece and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. She would put little check marks and highlights, and we would think that she was reading them, but she wasn't. But I hated it so much because everybody else was outside playing and having a good time. My brother and I were stuck in the house reading these books. But after a while, I actually began to enjoy reading the books, because even though we were desperately poor, between the covers of those books, I could go anywhere, I could be anybody, I could do anything. I began to read about amazing people. I read about Booker T. Washington, his autobiography called Up From Slavery. He was a slave, and it was illegal for slaves to read. And that right there is a topic in and of itself that a lot of young people should be thinking about. Why was it illegal for slaves to read? Because the slave owners knew that if they could read, they could liberate themselves. And the same thing goes today. Those young people who are not availing themselves of the educational opportunities are intentionally enslaving themselves.
The Latin phrase for education, educere, to bring forth from within, it presupposes all of these kids were born with that talent. That's their gift.
Absolutely.
You had a particular talent, too, in school, where you could push people's buttons. I read a commencement address you gave in 2007. That was a particularly good talent of yours.
It was. You know, I would study my classmates to figure out what made them really, really angry, because, you know, they were always calling me dummy, so this is the way I would get back at them. And I would figure out what made them angry, and I would just irritate them until they were about to explode. But I would never push the last button until we were in the classroom and the teacher was nearby. And,
all right, stay right there. Dr. Carson, we have a lot more to get to tonight. Still ahead, an open forum between Dr. Carson and our studio audience of journalists, political strategists, medical experts, and much more. Plus, there is already talk about recruiting the doctor for potentially a 2016 run. We're going to check in with Frank Luntz and his focus group, who actually dialed the speech that had everybody talking. And let's just say he may have found some campaign volunteers for Team Carson. Saving America continues straight ahead.
What about our taxation system? So complex. There is no one who can possibly comply with every jot and tittle of our tax and What we need to do is come up with something that's simple. And when I pick up my Bible, you know what I see? I see the fairest individual in the universe, God, and he's given us a system. It's called tithe. Now, we don't necessarily have to do it 10%, but it's principle. He didn't say, if your crops fail, don't give me any tithes. He didn't say, if you have a bumper crop, give me triple tithes. So there must be something inherently fair about proportionality.
All right, finally, after months, if not years, of hearing President Obama lecture the so-called rich about paying their fair shares, well, somebody finally had the courage to stand up and issue a rebuttal to the president and his divisive class warfare rhetoric. Now, it came when Dr. Benjamin Carson issued a forceful challenge to the president's liberal approach to last week's National Prayer Breakfast. But unlike so many politicians in Washington, the doctor's comments were much more than meaningless bluster. He actually backed him up with facts and policy proposals, including a flat tax. Joining me now to talk about his approach to saving America's failing economy, my guest for the hour, please, everybody, welcome back, Dr. Benjamin Carson. But I'm just curious. I don't know if anyone's even asked you this question yet. What was the president's reaction personally to your speech? Did you talk to him?
I talked to him afterwards, and he came over. He was very gracious. Said, you know, thank you for your speech. He didn't say he enjoyed it, but he did say, and he said he admired me.
I suspect you might have known that going in. Let me play. You said something in talking about the economy that really hit home with me. Okay. And that's about the deficit. $16.5 trillion we have.
That is a number that is so mind-boggling, and that's why I said if you counted one number per second, it would take you 507,000 years, more than 500,000 years. It's a number that's just staggering, and it's continuing to grow. And you know, we sit around and we talk about, well, maybe we can keep it from growing further. We need to reduce it, and the way to reduce it, obviously, is to get the economy growing again. You know, it doesn't really do any good to keep taking from this tree or that tree and squeezing it down. You know, I like parables, so in the book America the Beautiful, I give a parable of two brothers, identical brothers, and they're put on deserted islands with their families. And one had the philosophy, they only ate trees and products of trees. One had the philosophy, I'm going to eat what I need, and I'm going to let the others grow. Pretty soon, he had an entire forest. He had enough food forever. The other one, as soon as a sapling came up, he was on it and eating it. And he and his family eventually starved to death. It's basically the same kind of thing if you keep taking and taking, rather than creating a situation where you can grow. And you look at the fact that we have the highest corporate taxes in the world, and then we wonder why companies are going offshore. Well, we need to go back to basic business school and understand that companies are there to earn money, not to be social welfare organisms.
Mm-hmm. And let me play for you a history. This is President Obama has said many, many times that he's going to fix the debt and the deficit, and he spoke earlier this week at the State of the Union. Let's go down memory lane here.
Now, what I've done throughout this campaign is to propose a net spending cut. And I want to go through the federal budget line by line, page by page. Programs that don't work, we should cut.
Today, I'm pledging to cut the deficit we inherited by half by the end of my first term in office. I will use the money we're no longer spending on war to pay down our debt. My plan would cut our deficit by $4 trillion.
But what my opponent didn't tell you was that federal spending, since I took office, has risen at the slowest pace of any president in almost 60 years.
$6 trillion in new debt since he became president. I'm not asking you a political question. Right. To me, this is more of a moral issue.
It is.
You can't steal from your kids and grandkids.
And the people years before World War II, it's really when it started deteriorating, always felt that we needed to pay our debts down. And again, you'll see lots of quotes in the book about what our founding fathers and some of our predecessors thought about sending debt to the next generation, that in fact it was immoral. We've just completely forgotten about that now.
Yeah, I think that is a defining issue of our time.
it is. And, you know, the other thing is we need to create a situation that has everybody involved. Everybody has to have skin in the game in order to make this work. We talk about an egalitarian society. Well, if everybody is paying according to their ability, which is what the tithing system was, it's proportional. If you make $1 gazillion, you pay a lot of tax. If you make very little, you pay very little tax. But your skin is in the game. Now, the reason that our government, as it stands now, doesn't like that is because if everybody has skin in the game, it makes it a whole lot harder for you to raise taxes. And now you got to be accountable to everybody, and you can't just make 1% or 2% or 5%. Man.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back, and when we come back, Dr. Carson will share with us his prescription for curing America's failing healthcare system. And then Ben Carson for president? Well, that was the headline of a recent Wall Street Journal editorial. So are politics in the doctor's future? We'll ask him. And Frank Luntz and his focus group dial the doctor's prayer breakfast speech as Saving America continues. We're glad you're with us.
Here's my solution. When the person is born, give them a birth certificate, an electronic medical record, and a health savings account, to which money can be contributed pre-tax from the time you're born to the time you die. When you die, you can pass it on to your family members so that when you're 85 years old and you got 6 diseases, you're not trying to spend up everything. You're happy to pass it on, and there's nobody talking about death panels.
And welcome back to the special studio audience edition of Hannity. We're calling it Saving America. Joining me tonight for the hour is Dr. Benjamin Carson. Now, ever since his remarks at the National Prayer Breakfast, he has quickly become one of the leading voices against government-run health care. But again, unlike so many of our elected representatives in Washington, he isn't simply just complaining. He's offering real, reasonable answers to help fix the problem. And we welcome back Dr. Carson. And again, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
You gave a speech, a commencement speech in 2007, and you used a great analogy about if you give people their own accounts, and you used food stamps as an analogy.
Right.
And you said people don't buy a porterhouse on day one.
Right, exactly, because, you know, there are some government programs that do work, and food stamps do save people's lives. I think probably it's been abused a little bit and gone beyond that point now, but it serves as a good model because when people get their monthly allocation, they don't go out and buy porterhouse steak the first 5 days and starve the rest of the month. They learn how to allocate. And if you make people responsible financially for their own health with their own health savings account, believe me, they're not going to run off to the emergency room where things cost 5 times as much. They're going to go to a clinic. They get the same treatment in the clinic, but the difference is in the clinic, if they have some chronic disease, hypertension, diabetes, what have you, now you're going to get that under control too, so you're not back there in 3 weeks with another problem. So it begins to make a great deal of difference. Also, with the health savings account, you are going to develop a relationship with that healthcare provider. It's not this big nebulous third party. It's you and the provider. And you're not going to allow that provider to say you need 5 CT scans when you only need 1, nor is he going to suggest that because he knows that's coming directly out of your HSA. And it's going to bring medicine more into the free market because people are now going to be competing. And this is the way it should be.
You know, it's interesting. I have never been able to figure out, government never put our Social Security money in a lockbox like they said they would. Medicare's headed for bankruptcy. We talked about the debt, $16 trillion. Why do you think so many people put their faith, hope, trust in government to be the answer? And what do you think of Obamacare?
Well, I think that we've been programmed, unfortunately, to become victims and to think that somebody should be taking care of us. We've gone to a can-do nation to a what can you do for me nation. And we start inculcating that into people at an early age. You go to schools now, and they don't want to give the outstanding academic award because everybody's outstanding. And they don't want anybody to feel bad. You know, come on, give me a break. But you know, you start all of that stuff.
You can't play dodgeball either, doctor. You know, you can't keep score.
Yeah. So it perpetuates itself throughout their lives. And all of a sudden you wind up with a bunch of people who want to occupy everything because, you know, it's theirs anyway. You didn't deserve that. It should be mine.
Doesn't that go back to a lesson that you say your mother taught you about you control your destiny?
Absolutely.
And these health savings accounts? And you even said people that are poor and indigent,
right,
that there would be a way to help them.
Right, because the government is already spending enormous amounts of money on healthcare dollars on indigent people. Taking not all of that money, only a portion of it, but divvying it up into people's HSAs, over which they now have some control, would make a huge difference. Now, will it be necessary to do some fine-tuning, and will it be necessary to create some encouragements for people who are not indigent to put money into their HSAs, to encourage their employers to put money into their HSAs? Yes, but these are all things that we can work out. What we need to do is get out of the framework of, as soon as somebody's saying something, say, no, that can't work, this is why I can't, and say, yeah, that can work, and here's how it can work. And if we begin to put our minds together and understand the concept that we're aiming at, and that is bringing some personal responsibility into the healthcare arena, we can solve that problem. We got to get over the ideology. If we strain everything through an ideological screen, we will never make any progress.
Let me ask you, how many people in our audience, if I can get an audience shot, think that if the Republicans articulated what Dr. Carson is saying, you're laughing. How many of you think Obamacare maybe wouldn't have passed? Show of hands. Yeah. So there's a failure on the political opposition side of that debate too then.
And I don't know why that is.
I don't know either.
I'm not sure why they're not coming up with the right kinds of answers here.
Well, that dovetails perfectly into our next segment about your potential political future. When we come back, Carson 2016 has a nice ring to it, but are politics in the doctor's future? I'll ask him. Plus, Frank Luntz and his focus group, they dialed Dr. Carson's prayer breakfast remarks, and wait till you see what caused the dials to go through the roof across party lines. All of that and more as our special studio audience edition of Hannity rolls on. Welcome back to the studio audience edition of Hannity, and tonight we are focusing on saving America with a very special guest, Dr. Benjamin Carson. Now, he is the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University. Now, his remarks at last week's National Prayer Breakfast not only set the blogosphere on fire, it also resulted in many asking him to consider a run for elected office. Now, that includes the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which recently published a column that was titled, quote, Ben Carson for President. Now, in just a moment, I'll ask him if he has any plans to pursue a career in politics. But first, pollster Frank Luntz recently convened a focus group of California voters and asked them to watch and dial the doctor's popular speech. Let's take a look at this.
Sean, the words of Benjamin Carson have really struck a chord with a lot of Americans. We're here in Los Angeles with a group of swing voters, and we want to know what they think of his language. But before we go to them, let's go to a clip that dialed particularly well. Remember, the red line represents swing Republicans, the green line swing Democrats. On the deficit and debt, man, does this guy score well.
Our deficit is a big problem. Think about it. And our national debt, $16.5 trillion. You think that's not a lot of money? Tell you what, count one number per second, which you can't even do because once you get to 1,000, it takes you longer than a second. But one number per second. You know how long it would take you to count the 16 trillion? 507,000 years. More than 500,000 years to get there. We have to deal with this.
Clearly that language connected. Now tell me, Dr. Carson, what was so powerful? Give me a word or phrase to describe him.
Passionate.
Articulate.
Sincere.
Bold and real.
Analytical.
Self-reliant.
Truthful. Sincere.
Believable.
Provocative.
Is this the kind of guy that you want to see in politics? Is this the kind of guy, yet why yes?
He's a guy he speaks his mind, and he's very open-minded and
why yes?
passionate.
He speaks for physicians, I think, basically.
I liked his sense of fairness. I felt he was very fair in what he was saying.
What is it about him that cut across partisan lines? You never see that in politics these days.
He seemed to care. He seemed to genuinely care about what he was talking about.
To me, he was just like me. He was just a regular, ordinary person.
Do you think that he was too aggressive? The president was there Some people thought that it was inappropriate for him to say what he said. You're nodding your head no. You think it was appropriate?
I think it was appropriate because you have to hit on the topics that people want to talk about, and we can't keep candy coating everything. So,
And this is our country.
What does that mean?
It belongs to all of us, not just to the people in Washington. All of us.
Do you think that people in Washington listen to you?
No.
Do you think he listens to you?
Yes. He being...
Dr. Carson?
Yes.
So there's a language there. Keep going.
And like you said, it's un-American to bite your tongue, to hold back and not say what you think.
You guys agree with that?
Yes.
Yes. It's a good way to get out of the segment. Sean, there aren't many people right now who have the language to connect to the American people, whether it's American values, as you speak of, or common sense, as she spoke of. But there's something about the doctor's message and delivery that really does connect across partisan lines. Very impressive. Back to you.
All right, sounds like Frank may have found some, well, Carson campaign volunteers and still with us to talk about the possibility of a career in politics. The man himself, Dr. Benjamin Carson. Just a quick poll. How many of you would like to see Dr. Carson run? Wow. Okay, that's everybody. What do you make of that?
Well, I've always said that the only way I would go into politics is if God grabbed me by the collar and stuck me there. It's not something that has been an ambition of mine. But I do have a great desire to get our populace educated. Because if we get our populace educated, they will be able to decipher the truth from what's false. And if we don't start doing that, we're going to go down the same path as all the pinnacle nations that preceded us.
You have said, and I've read a lot of speeches now that you have given, and in commencement speeches and elsewhere, and even I think you mentioned in this speech, that doctors played a very pivotal role in terms of our founding and our framers, yes. And you want to see doctors more involved in politics.
I do, because you know, doctors and scientists learn to make decisions based on facts. They use empirical data as opposed to ideologues who don't really have any facts to make their decisions on.
Can I ask, you retire in June.
Yes.
I'm even hesitant to ask you this, but I think I have to because it's on the table. Do you consider, are you aligned with a party? Would you want to answer who you voted for president?
I'm independent.
Okay.
And, you know, I tend to align myself closer with parties that are doing things or advocating things that would be good for the country. And that should tell you who I voted for. I won't go any further than that.
Okay. I'll take a... Anyone want to take any bets? But all right. All right. When we come back, we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to open all this up to our studio audience of political strategists, journalists, medical experts, much more, as they, along with Dr. Carson, they offer up their solutions for helping to save America, whether it's the economy, health care, all issues on the table. Our studio audience, they'll join the discussion next. Welcome back to the special studio audience edition of Hannity, and Dr. Benjamin Carson is with us. All right, you ready to take our audience questions?
Absolutely.
All right, let's start over here. Jason.
I wanted to ask you about kids growing up in circumstances that you grew up in today, in the ghetto in particular.
Yes.
What's missing? Are there not enough adults with that sort of mindset? Is it a leadership failure? Is it a breakdown of the family? What's the problem?
Combination of the things that you mentioned. There's a great family breakdown. For instance, when you look at the African American community, 70% of the babies are born out of wedlock. Now, you're not supposed to talk about that because all family situations are supposed to be equal these days, right? But they're not equal. That father is very much needed, and producing the right kinds of role models for the children and giving them a value system. Because if you don't provide them with a value system at home, they're going to find it somewhere else, and it may not be a good value system. So you combine that with the fact that when they go to school, in many cases, they're surrounded by a bunch of politically correct people who begin to indoctrinate them in something other than the can-do attitude, and we got a problem.
Dr. Siegel?
You know, Dr. Carson, I'm not surprised that a doctor like you, who's a top pediatric neurosurgeon, who literally has the brains of children in his hands, personal responsibility would be your first and foremost idea. And taking that theme further, I wonder, you started talking about health savings accounts and skin in the game. How do you feel about this idea that if patients knew what they were buying, knew what they were getting, how much a CAT scan cost, how much an MRI cost? Instead, we have a system where all of this feeds together with physicians who are afraid of malpractice, afraid of being sued. So many tests are ordered unnecessarily. Yes. On the patient side, they don't know what they're getting. On the doctor side, they're afraid of not ordering it. What do you have to say about that?
Well, first of all, I would say that you look at all the countries in the world, we're the ones who have the big problem with malpractice. So what is it that's here that isn't everywhere else? The Trial Lawyers Association. Okay, special interest groups. Anything in our society almost that comes out of Washington that doesn't make sense is attached to a special interest group. They've become, as I alluded to in the speech, the fourth branch of government. Until we deal with that, we're going to keep doing things that don't make sense.
Deneen?
Well, Dr. Carson, I want to thank you for your leadership. But you do know that the black liberal establishment is not going to be happy with you. And I'm talking about the community activists, some of the pastors, some of the politicians, and the black media, because it's your story of success that they don't want communicated to the black community because they thrive on talking about blacks are victims and need special treatment. So I want to thank you for all you do and for your leadership, because we need more leaders such as yourself to communicate the story that America really is an exceptional country.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I've heard from a lot of black leaders, actually, since this time, who are very thrilled with what I'm saying. I'm sure there are some that are not, but people are starting to think for themselves, and this is what I really enjoy. Black people, white people, brown people, yellow people, think for yourself. Don't be a puppet.
Celia?
So the Government Accountability Office came out with their year-end fiscal report back in January, and they said that we need to start running surpluses of 1% over the next century just to keep the same debt to GDP ratio we have today. Right. The Senate can't even budget or process a budget in the Senate right now. How do we shift the narrative to start talking about surpluses?
Well, you know, I think we would get surpluses almost immediately if we changed our policies, if we took away a lot of the burdensome regulations, if we dropped the tax rates, you would see money flooding back into this place if we just gave people the kinds of incentives that they used to have. And you look what happened in this country when we didn't have an oppressive government and when we did encourage entrepreneurship. We just skyrocketed. It's all pent up right now, ready to go. Look at all the money that's on Wall Street. That money would be invested immediately if people felt that there wasn't some nefarious government out there trying to figure out how to get their money.
And by the way, the money wouldn't be in the Caymans, which you mentioned in your speech. And also if we would drill.
Yes.
Drilling, natural gas, whether Saudi Arabia.
I mean, you look at North and South Dakota, Montana, you look at all that shale up there.
Oh, it's crazy.
I mean, we could just blow Saudi Arabia off the map economically.
Yeah, I love not being PC. Jeff Lord.
Doctor, I'm taking care of my 93-year-old mom, and so we have a few doctors in our life. And one of them left his practice not long ago for something I'm learning called a concierge practice. Another is very concerned about his practice and its continuance and his role in his own practice. Can you talk a little bit about how this Obamacare is affecting doctors in the medical community?
Yes. Well, first of all, recognize that you have to go back and look at this historically. When Medicare, Medicaid first came along, you know, doctors who took care of those patients knew that they weren't going to make any money, but they were okay with it because the insurance companies at that time did have to pay for the ones who did have insurance. And just about every doctor, Dr. Siegel can tell you, had a percentage of their practice that was indigent, and they didn't care. We've always taken care of those patients. But now, because the margins are so narrow, because the insurance companies can do what they want to do, they're not capable of doing that anymore. And, you know, I do think we need some insurance reform also, because when you stop and you think about it, one of the major pillars of our medical system are insurance companies that make money by denying people care. We need to deal with that situation because that's an inherent conflict of interest. And I'm sure if we sit down and put our heads to it, we can figure out a way that they can make an adequate profit and people can still be taken care of. But remember, when we go to the HSA situation, the insurance companies will have a very different role. because they will just be doing bridge insurance, and we also will have a way of taking care of catastrophic insurance.
All right, we're going to take a break. We'll come back more with our studio audience and Dr. Carson on the special edition of Hannity. And welcome back to the special audience edition of Hannity, and Dr. Ben Carson is with us, and we're taking questions. Our good friend Sandra Smith of the Fox Business Network.
Lightning
Thanks,
round?
Sean. Dr. Carson.
Yeah, this will be the lightning round because we don't have a lot of time.
Sure, and I think that one of the biggest questions after listening to you tonight, it's been an absolute pleasure, is have we gone too far? Do you think that America can come back from where we are today?
Great question.
I do think that. That's why I wrote the book, because I think we have what it takes to do it. We're just going to have to speak up. That's the key.
Jamie?
It's January 2017. You've just been inaugurated President of the United States. What would be your top legislative priorities?
Well, assuming that things are continuing the way they are now, we got to get the economy working again, because that will take care of the jobs. Productivity rather than just mindless jobs.
All right, Leslie.
Doctor, when you say things people don't want to hear, usually there's an immediate effort to delegitimize the speaker. Were you concerned about that before you made that speech in that forum with that audience?
I wasn't concerned, because there's nothing that they can do to delegitimize me. There's no skeleton that they can find. They're going to try. Good luck.
Yeah. You actually said in one of your speeches, live a clean life. You don't have to worry, and don't lie, because you don't have to worry about what you said 3 months ago. I read that.
He's good.
Kerry.
Doctor, in the 1960s, you had Ronald Reagan speaking out against socialized medicine for the AMA. The AMA made a complete 180 and was speaking out for Obamacare. What happened?
Well, first of all, only 23% of doctors belong to the AMA. And they go and they grab those ones and they say, this represents the AMA. Enough said.
Betsy?
I'd like to know how you would solve this problem as a doctor and also as President of the United States. Section 1311 of this law empowers the federal government.
Law.
The Obama health law empowers the federal government for the first time in history to dictate how doctors treat privately insured patients, even if you bought a plan like an Aetna plan or a Cigna plan and paid for it yourself. How will you protect that doctor-patient relationship?
Probably by rewriting that law.
Good answer.
Doctor, thank you so much for speaking your mind. I certainly hope you keep it up in the future. But who in the current debate reflects your values and views the most effectively of anybody in politics or public life?
Well, I certainly enjoyed what Senator Rubio had to say last night. And I'm sure there are many up-and-coming young people, Bobby Jindal, and we'll just have to keep looking and hoping that people are courageous and forward-thinking.
Heather?
Does a message of personal responsibility sell politically anymore? We've seen President Obama suggesting universal pre-kindergarten care, basically telling parents that it's not their responsibility to prepare their children for school, but rather the government's. I don't think your mother would have bought that message. She understood that it was for you to do that, but we seem to be expanding things that the government can do instead of individuals.
Yes.
Can a politician stand up and say, sorry, we're not going to give you any more programs? It's for you to take care of your lives?
I think it can sell, but we have to start talking about it. You see, the politically correct police have silenced the debate. We have to create the debate again, and a lot of the people who are in the middle will have an aha moment.
Stefano.
The speech with the part about your mother touched me so deeply as a mother of young boys, and I'm wondering how can we best limit the government in a way that creates a million Mrs. Carsons raising up her sons and herself out of poverty into prosperity. How do we do that?
We become smart voters. And, you know, a lot of people, they go into the voting booth, they say, oh, there's a name I recognize. Yeah, I'm voting for that one. That's about all they know. If you don't know more than that, you probably should just not vote, or you need to go and teach yourself, because you could be voting against your self-interest.
Dr. Siegel,
Carson, do you think the president heard you? I was hoping that with everything that had happened, that he'd come up to you afterwards and say, I heard you. Do you think he heard you?
I'm praying that he did. If he did, you should see some changes in his actions.
You would, you're based in Baltimore, and you touched on Medicaid earlier, and as you know, the health outcomes of patients on Medicaid are a lot poorer than they are for private insurance because it underpays doctors and underpays hospitals. But this is the big debate in states around the country, is whether they should expand their Medicaid programs as Obamacare requires them to do. If you were advising the governor of Maryland, what would you tell him to do with the Medicaid expansion?
Well, I would say we need to start talking about something that makes sense. You know, it doesn't make a lot of sense to invest a lot of our eggs in something that doesn't work.
Jedediah, real quick.
Yeah, I'm a former teacher and dean, and I just want to know, how do we get young people to care about the debt and deficit?
I think we have to give them examples, like the one that I gave, 507,000 years, so they begin to understand what they're facing.
I'm sorry, we missed 3 people. Go ahead, Mary, quick.
I was just going to say it's easier to be ignorant and reliant than it is to be responsible and informed. How do you change that?
Well, one of the things we're going to have to do, and I don't have a lot of time to get into it, but we have to use technology. There are some wonderful ways that we can use that. Virtual classrooms that can help us enormously. I'm working on that project with something in Baltimore right now.
And you have your scholarship fund, and it's on
Absolutely.
the web at
carsonscholars.org.
All right.
Everybody get involved.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Great honor to have you.
Absolutely.
And that is all the time we have left. As always, thank you for being with us. Let not your heart be troubled. The news continues. We'll see you back here Monday night.